and I will be chairing the subcommittee for this meeting this afternoon. I would like to first introduce the members of the subcommittee along with me this afternoon. On my left, I have Councillor Abbas, and on my right, I have Councillor Lydiard. Also in attendance are the Licensing Officer, Elizabeth Cox, Legal Advisor, Gabriel, and Clerk, Luke Tucker. I would like to remind everyone present this afternoon that this meeting is being recorded, with a copy of the recording being published on the Council's website. Before we start, I would like to explain the process of the hearing. Firstly, the Licensing Officer will present their report. Following this, members and all relevant parties will have the opportunity to ask any questions. Then each party will be given the opportunity to give their case. This is also followed by questions from members and all parties. Once everyone has presented their case, all members will have time to give a closing summary, with the licence holder having their final say. The subcommittee will then retire to consider its decision and will be accompanied by the clerk and legal advisor. We will then return with our decision. Does anybody have any questions? Thank you. Item 1 on the agenda. Do we have any apologies for absence?
We have no apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Agenda 2, any items of urgent business. I have not been advised of any items of urgent business. Item 3, does any members have any declarations of interest to declare?
No.
Thank you. Item 4 on the agenda, determination of an objection to a temporary event notice. Do any of the parties have any requests in particular, permission for another person to appear other than specified in the advance notice, for permission to cross-examine, or any other requests? That's fine. Thank you. In respect, this could be adjournment or the introduction of further document. If any such requests are made, the subcommittee should consider. I would now like to ask the Licensing Officer to present the factual report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. An objection has been received from Essex Police with regards to a temporary event notice submitted in relation to a Christmas Carol concert at Graystown Park. The objection relates to the licensing objective, the prevention of crime and disorder. Section 104, subsection 2 of the Licensing Act 2003 allows the police or environmental health to object to a temporary event notice if they believe that allowing the premises to be used will undermine one or more of the licensing objectives. The licensing objective being prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, prevention of public nuisance and the protection of children from harm. The Licensing Department received the application for a temporary event notice on the 16th of November from Tina Holland for an event on the 13th of December of this year. A copy of the 10 is attached at Appendix A at page 9. The 10 relates to a Christmas Carol concert with a sale of mulled wine to customers between 6:30 p.m. and 8:30 p.m. for up to 40 people. A letter of acknowledgement for the 10 was sent electronically on the 16th of November, and a copy is attached at Appendix B at page 13. On the 21st of November, we received an objection notice from Simon Barnes on behalf of Essex Police, outlining his objection that the police are satisfied that the licensing objective of the prevention of crime and disorder would be undermined. The reasons for this being that the area to be used falls within the boundary of the Grays Public Spaces Protection Order. A copy of the objection notice is attached at Appendix C at page 15, and a copy of the PSPO is attached at Appendix D at page 17. I do have a couple of copies of the map in colour if needed, because it hasn't printed out particularly well on there. No objections were received from Environmental Health in relation to this event. Following the hearing of the submissions today, the committee will need to consider what action, if any, is needed to ensure that the licensing objectives are complied with. The power to impose conditions on a 10 is only available if a premises already has a premises licence, which this one does not. So the following options will be available following hearing all the evidence today. to allow the temporary event notice to be being determined as applied for, or to reject the temporary event notice being determined as applied for and issue a counter notice which will prevent the event from going ahead. The decision will take immediate effect. However, there is a right of appeal for all parties. No appeal may be brought later than 5 working days before the day on which the event period is specified in the temporary event notice. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any members have any questions of the licensing officer?
Yeah.
Councillor Lydiard.
Thanks, Chair. Just wondering, will this set a precedent in this area?
I think that's something that you're coming out from this and have to take legal advice from the legal advisor on that.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll have one question. Do we get a lot of licensing requests similar to this in Graystown Park?
There have been previous requests. I had a quick look since the introduction of this PSPO. This one came in on the 1st of April of this year. There were 2 granted or not objected to in June and August of this year.
Did any of them sell alcohol?
Yes, they were both included supply of alcohol.
Thank you. Councillor Abbas.
Thank you, Chair. How many off-license shops are in this PSPO area selling alcohol?
Off the top of my head, I wouldn't know. I can find that out and let you know in a moment if that's acceptable.
Thank you.
Any more questions from members? Thank you. Does the police have any questions for the licensing officer?
No questions, sir.
Thank you. Does the applicant have any questions for the licensing officer? Thank you. I would now like the police to present their case.
Thank you, sir. So my name is Simon Barnes. I'm an Essex Police Licensing Officer with responsibility for the Brentwood and Thurrock regions. We have made this unusual application for an objection to this temporary event notice due to the presence of the PSPO boundaries having been moved from the original PSPO that we were aware of that were only covered the core of Grays town centre. So the PSPO was amended, but unfortunately the police were not made aware of this amendment until about 3 weeks ago. And so unfortunately the previous 2 went on the basis that there was no PSPO in that area and therefore we had no powers to object. Even though there was crime and disorder in the area, there was no links to the applicants at the time. So obviously this is an unusual application for myself. This is the first time I've ever applied to object to a 10 solely on the basis that there is a PSPO in the area. PSPOs are not common, particularly in Brentwood there are none, and in Thurrock most are linked to the street drivers over West Thurrock, which is a non-alcoholic matter, and then the one in Grays Town. So the applicant has applied in good faith, and my objection is not solely on the basis of the applicant, but the presence of the location itself. So I want to make that very clear that the applicant, in our eyes, is a person of good character, and that should be noted. The Public Space Protection Order, as your officers outlined, was in its current form, was issued with effect of April of 2023, extended its coverage now to the very boundaries sitting on the park itself, with a slight nub going beyond the northeast border. Under the PSPO, it is prohibited action is to drink or consume alcohol within the public space that has been outlined in the application. Licensed premises are exempt from this under section 67 of the Act, and I particularly draw notice to section 67 subsection 1D, which outlines where 10 applies, the PSPO will then be suspended within the 10 area plus its curtilage for a period of up to half an hour beyond the 10 application. So when we're looking at this application, we unfortunately must also consider the fact that it has an extra half an hour where the PSPO and the protections granted under it are effectively suspended for the area where the 10 is being held. In relation to the park specifically, I've spoken with the Inspector for Community Policing for Thurrock, as well as the team sergeant who covers the park itself. They've highlighted to me that a number of antisocial behaviour incidents, including violence, have been attributed to the park, and those were found to be due to the intoxicated nature of having consumed alcohol in the park itself. Obviously, in this situation, we're in an unusual situation where the event itself, were it packaged anywhere else, I probably would not have an issue with it. But where it is has created a conflict between the Licensing Act and the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act, quite a mouthful I'll give you. Those two are now effectively in conflict. Policing-wise, we cannot arbitrate between these two acts. They are both acts of Parliament to which you yourselves will need to make effectively a political adjudication that will then guide us in the future regarding this new area within the PSPO. The town centre, the general position has been to object to virtually everything that comes through there because of the nature of the town centre. It is much greater than that of the park, but they are equal. We also have to draw your attention to the fact that every time a 10 goes successfully, it creates counter evidence, which would then mean that we would have to, on the next application cycle, not seek the park to be part of the PSPO, which finds us in this very difficult position where I'm having to go against someone of good character. I'm not going to go any further than that and open to questions, as I feel that you're more likely to ask more pointed questions than I can think of as I've been building this case.
Thank you. Does any members have any questions? Councillor Abbas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your report. Licensing officer did mention earlier there were 2 licenses approved after issuing up this PSPU. And you did mention something, there was some legislation. Can you please clarify that, please? Thank you.
Of course, sir. So effectively, when the new order was granted, a copy of that order was not passed to the community policing within the Thurrock area. So we were unaware of the extension, and this was not passed on to the licensing team, therefore, to enforce that position. It is unfortunate. I would have not otherwise objected to the other 2 so that this position could have been more clearer at this stage.
Thank you. At those previous events, was there any incidents?
Unfortunately, I don't have that information. I can obviously look into that if you wish, but that would rely on the data being stored properly within our command and control.
Thank you. Anything? Okay, would the licensing officer have any questions?
No, thank you, Chair.
Would the applicant have any questions?
I don't have questions as such, but I would like to state that I find it very hard that since we've had the community...
I'll give you your own
fine.
statement.
Yeah, that's fine then. No,
You have your own time, don't worry. Would you be able to clarify the exemption you was discussing, please?
Yes, so under Section 67 of the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act, effectively grants an exemption to licensed premises and the curtilage around a premises for the duration of their licensable activities. When a temporary event notice comes in, if it is granted and allowed to proceed, it triggers, I believe it's 1D specifically, which effectively is the same as if it were a licensed premises and would effectively suspend the PSPO in that area alone. It wouldn't affect Grays Town. That would not be. It would only suspend it for the area requested by the temporary event notice.
I'm going to allow the legal officer to ask a question.
And on your reading of that, is it suggested that that applies beyond the premises itself? Because you said about suspending the PSPO. Is that, on your reading, is that beyond the premises, or?
So our reading would be, it would be the premises plus any curtilage around the premises. So unfortunately, without having access to the planning laws and access to the land registry for that premises, depending on how it's been defined in planning, we will be in a position where we may not know where that line is, and so we may have to, unfortunately, extend it for the entirety of the park, which would be uncomfortable. But we would seek to clarify that. But the law specifically states the physical premises, in this case, everything outlined by the 10, will be considered part of the premises. So if it were to cover the whole park, for instance, it would then be the whole park. I believe in this case it is just the cafe and its effectively equivalent surrounds.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. I would now like to ask the licence holder to present their case. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that we are very grateful to have a PSPO order in place since April, and it has made a significant difference to the park. Before the PSPO came in, we did have a huge problem with people coming into the park, drinking, being there all day, and then causing antisocial behaviour. And that has ineffectively disappeared since the PSPO came in, and we're eternally grateful for that. I do find it hard to believe that the community police officers did not know about the PSPO coming in April this year, as we've had them in the park. They hold their Let's Talk meetings. Before that was Coffee with Cops in the park. I've spoken to them directly. We have regular patrols walking through the park. They come into the cafe and ask if we've got any problems. They all know about the PSPO order, so I do find that particularly hard to believe. And also, as already been mentioned, there have been two much larger events in the park, and as far as I'm aware, I've attended two of the, I think, the three big ones we've had, and there have been no known issues. Nothing, as far as I know, has been reported to the police. They were all very successful events. This, by scale, is 100 times smaller, and it is just purely to take place inside the cafe. We did it last year. Obviously, we didn't come under the PSPO last year. It was very successful. We only sold it, the mulled wine to people that were attending the concert. No one came in off the street. Everyone was there in the cafe, enjoying the band, singing carols. And we are very small, so we don't have a huge supply of alcohol. So we're probably talking sort of like 10, 15 bottles, and then once that's gone, it's gone. And normally in its nature, mulled wine is very low percentage, especially when it's been heated up. As we all know, alcohol evaporates. So have you got anything to add, Teresa?
Well, I'd only say that having events in the park, sorry, do you want me to use my microphone? I don't normally use a microphone, I don't normally need to. Having events in the park actually helps to prevent ASB, and we know this because we do work extensively with the police, the community policing teams, and I've actually been on a number of local patrols with the local teams, including the sergeant that was mentioned. I would also say that there was, as far as I'm aware, there's never been any links to crime and disorder to any of the events in the park. And like Tina, I've attended, and I even organised one of them, although that was for families, so we didn't have alcohol at that one. And maybe going forward in the future, we should look at getting the cafe licence, as it seems that would be a good way around it. But we are talking about a very, very small event. For example, the light switch on at the weekend actually had a number of people standing in the middle of the high street drinking. That they'd bought it from off licences, and they were standing in the street, which happens frequently in the evening. We do try to prevent, we did even before the PSPO was in place, we tried to work with the police to prevent drinking in the park. And we have a very good relationship with the police, one that we certainly don't want to risk. But I do feel that this is a very small number of people inside the cafe. It's not open to, as Tina mentioned, people to just wander in. It's predominantly, it will be volunteers that are there, people who work or volunteer in the cafe throughout the year, and other people that are associated with the cafe.
Thank you. Does any members have any questions of the licence holders? Councillor Lilliard.
Yeah, just wondered, maybe it's a good idea, or could you possibly arrange for a premises licence for that particular day? Is it a major problem?
It'd be outside the legal timeframes for applying for a full licence at this point.
Councillor Abbas.
Thank you. You did mention you will serve mulled wine within your premises. And what is your capacity? Because it did say you are expecting around 40 people. So what is the capacity of the CAF?
Seated, the planning was for 30 people. Obviously, we expect slightly higher numbers, and that was to include additional volunteers and also musicians from the band that come to play, which is Spectrum Brass Band.
So do you have any policies in place to make sure the wine is only served to these people who are invited?
They would have to be seated inside the cafe or standing inside the cafe, and that would be their policy. We would have someone on the door to make sure they weren't taking it out and wandering off through the park.
Councillor Lilliard.
Can you supply non-alcoholic wine? Does that work?
Yeah, we can also do that.
As Tina mentioned earlier, mulled wine by its very nature, when you warm mulled wine, anything with alcohol in it, the alcohol mainly evaporates, it burns off, because alcohol does that, as we know. So we're looking at low alcohol, we're looking at buying pre-made, which tends to be lower alcohol anyway. By the time we've heated it, the alcohol level is going to be even lower. We could also do non-alcoholic as well. We often do anyway, because I don't drink alcohol, so but some people do like to have a drink, especially if it's a cold evening, and it does help people to sing carols as well, I find.
Thank you. Regarding last year's event, how did that go? Did you have any incidents?
None whatsoever.
Tina didn't sing though, that was the only incident. She refused to join in. She claimed she was busy.
Councillor Abbas.
You did mention 2 previous events. So were you the organizers of those events?
Any more questions? Would the licence hold officer have any questions?
No, thank you, Chair.
The police?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Obviously, you've made reference to the boiling of mulled wine. Obviously, it is both police position as well as the RAC that with 30 minutes of boiling of mulled wine, you just need 2 small glasses to reach the drink drive limit as set by statute, which would indicate intoxication in law. So there is almost no way to boil it to the point where it's below the legal limits set out in the Licensing Act and will still be an alcoholic drink for all intents and purposes. Is that correct?
I wouldn't know without having to Google it and find out.
Any more?
Yeah, I have no further questions. That was the only area that came up during those.
Thank you. We're now going to go into summarising the cases. So I'd now like to ask the licensing officer to summarise their case.
Thank you. Firstly, just to answer Councillor Abbas's question from right at the beginning, having a quick filter on our database, there's 12 premises licensed to sell alcohol off of the premises in that area, including supermarkets like Morrison's and Iceland, and one of the chemists as well.
to this PSPO?
Yeah, they've all been issued a number of years. Only to add that obviously you've heard evidence from both the police and from the Ms Holland who's submitted the temporary event notice, and just to remind the panel that the only options available are either to allow the temporary event notice as applied for or to reject in its entirety. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the police like to summarise their case?
Thank you, sir. So I have been attempting to gain access to our databases to attempt to look at those two events and any and all calls, but unfortunately the internet connection here is not the greatest and I have been unable to gain access to our secured databases. So I can offer no evidence in either direction regarding the question of any issues with the last two incidents, last two temporary event notices, which I believe were for a date in the late June and a date in late August of this year. So obviously this is an unavoidable case for me to bring. I don't like bringing these types of cases. Ultimately, we are not able to arbitrate between two conflicting pieces of legislation. That is why we are here, is to seek effectively an adjudication of which takes priority, this event and this temporary event notice, or the PSPO. Obviously, if the application is granted, the PSPO will be made suspended for the 10 up to 30 minutes after to allow for the drinking up after the drinks. Obviously, please be aware that it's only 30 minutes. Make sure people are clearing because we don't want people to then suddenly become unlawful in the area. But ultimately, any drinking that will be done on that event may then affect the PSPO due to the antisocial behaviour that we see in the park on a regular basis. I can't comment as to why community police, the ground community policing teams have not communicated up that they've realised the PSPO is in place. That is something I will take up with the inspector as to why it wasn't alerted to myself so that I could have had this argument with the larger events rather than this event. But this is where we find ourselves. Obviously, if I didn't, now that I'm aware of it, would completely undermine any further applications I would make from this day onwards. So I have to make this application on the basis that the PSPO exists. I'm now aware of it.
Thank you. I would now like to ask the licence holder to make a closing summary statement.
We still wish for the 10 application to go ahead. This would be for the cafe, not including the whole park. We understand that Simon's saying that it may in effect include the whole park, and it would go on till suspend the PSPO up till 9 o'clock. Any antisocial behaviour that happens in the park, I believe, happens from between 10:30 to the early hours, and that's normally congregated round by the toilets, and they're smoking weed, and they bring their own cans in, and that would have absolutely no effect on selling a few cups of mulled wine to our customers and visitors who are predominantly 40 plus. You know, we don't get lots of young people come to these events, or people that we think are going to be typically drinking and causing issues in the park or the surrounding area.
Thank you. The committee will now retire to consider its decision and will be accompanied by the clerk and legal advisor to the subcommittee. But I will need to ask, could everybody leave the chamber while we make this decision, or we would need to use the chamber? Thank you. I'd now like to pass over to the legal advisor to give the decision of what we have made.
Thank you, Chair. The decision of the subcommittee is to allow the temporary event to take place. There will be written reasons forwarded to both parties within 5 working days. The responsible authority has a right to appeal, as they will know, but not fewer than 5 days before the event is due to take place.
Thank you, and thank you everyone. I'd now like to thank everyone for their attendance this afternoon, and I will be closing this meeting at 15:43. Thank you.